All right, we're getting a few more people signing up. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Tonight's webinar is about, it's sponsored by CETO. We're going to be talking about Simrad Marine Electronics and Navionics and how to tie it all together to improve your fishing strategy and to maximize all of the benefits that you have using these two products. So let's get started. As I say that, then my computer is not doing what it needs to do. All right, and a quick reminder, as we go through this, you'll see that I use the Platinum Plus 907 card for the area that I'm in. Today is the last day to save $30 on Navionics Platinum Charts. Navionics.com, there's your discount code, Platinum 2018. You'll see as we go through this webinar how beneficial those charts are with their satellite overlay and the 3D views and the panoramic photos. It really does make a big difference. But you have until midnight tonight to save $30 on those cards at Navionics.com. Platinum 2018 is your discount code. All right, tonight we're going to be going through, I have the NSS Evo 312 Simrad, which is the third from the left. The Go series is hugely popular. The Go 9 is currently bundled at West Marine and Bass Pro, I believe, and that comes with a Navionics chip. It's a US and Canada chip. It's not the Platinum that we've been talking about, but it is a very good chip. It just doesn't have those 3 extra options with the panoramic photos, the satellite overlay, and the 3D views, but it does have the same charts and maps. You just have to pick your area that you want to download when you log on to Navionics.com. So real quickly before we get started, on your Simrad unit in your files section of your menu, you will have a PDF, a searchable PDF of your owner's manual. So anything that we go over tonight that you get out on the water and you panic because you can't figure out how to do it or whatever, just go into My Files. You'll see on the side on the toolbar menu, My Files, and then it's the operator manual. And you can actually search that manual and it'll bring up the section that'll remind you what you need to do for whatever particular situation that you're in. All right, so we're going to start out when you come to your Simrad menu. When you turn on your unit, this is going to be the screens and the icons that you see. You may or may not have all of these options. I don't have autopilot. I don't have radar. I do have the chart, the echo, and the structure scan. We're not going to talk about the splitting the screens on the right-hand side. That's just a user preference. We want to really focus on the maps themselves tonight. So when you get to this point, you're going to click on chart, and that's the only menu that we're going to talk about this evening. All right, the chart settings. This is the very first thing that you're going to do when you set up your boat. Okay, the 3D boat selection. That's so when you have your 3D center console, there's different options that you can select there, but I have a center console, so that's what I use. Boat settings for your dock-to-dock auto routing. It's going to be your beam, your draft, and your length. It's very important because when Navionics and Simrad work together to do your auto routing, they will, based on the sonar charts that are in the unit, they are going to give you the safest passageway to get from one point to another. So that's important to get that set up. Your range rings, I keep mine on. They're usually like at a half to a nautical mile. It just gives me a good perception. I like to use it in the daylight. So if I'm ever running at night, I have a really good idea of where I'm located to land. And some people like them, some people don't, but I really do like them. The pop-up information, I always check that. I like to have that on because when you hit your waypoints, your routes, your tracks, it tells you exactly which one you're on, where you're going. And it also lets you edit those items right on your screen. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Grid lines, I like that because that is your latitude and longitude. You know exactly where you're at. If you're fishing offshore and you need to stay within state waters, you know where that line is and you can't cross it. With me, like being a 6-pack captain, I can't take anybody out past that state line. And vice versa. There's people that have federal charters. So but it's just a good idea to know where you're at. And then of course your waypoints and your routes. So this is your chart panel. These are the options that you have on your chart panel. When you pull up your chart, you'll be able to see your waypoints, and not all at the same time, but these are just the things that we're going to talk about this evening. Vessel with extension line, I don't have that option on mine. I don't use it. That goes out 1 nautical mile in front of you. I think that's a good thing when you're more offshore. It just depends upon how much stuff that you want to have on your screen. Your route, that's where you set your route, and we're going to go over how to do that this evening. Your north indicator, that number 4 button that's up on the right hand side, that's important because we're going to talk about our different headings and how it is to set those and what preference that you like. I always do heading up. So if I'm heading south and my north, I know which way. So if it's dark or if it's raining, a storm has come up or something, I know which way is north. If I'm on the Gulf of Mexico, I know I need to get my heading to go north. It's just personal preference of how you want to read your chart and which way you. If you're going south and you have the north up direction, your boat's going to be going downwards on your chart versus forward. So it looks like you're going backwards, but you're not. It's just your heading indicator. So that's just something you kind of have to play with if you're not familiar with doing those. Grid lines, again, we just talked about that. That is all your latitude and longitude lines. I like to have them on your range rings, your track. Number 7, I don't keep that on when I'm in local waters, but when I go to Louisiana, interesting situation that happened with that is I left out of the Hopedale Marina. I knew where I was going, but I always, because it's so confusing, there's so much grass and marsh everywhere, I set up my track, and I actually ended up rescuing a guy who was lost and injured pretty severely. And I didn't have to worry about trying to navigate back because I just followed my track back to the marina and we got him to the hospital. And so when you're in waters that you're not familiar with, I think it's hugely important that you set that track. I'm going to Steenhatchee in a couple weekends. I'm not that familiar with there. You can get disoriented. So if you have your track, you know where you started from, you know where you're at, you can get back. Your chart range scale and your range ring interval on 8 and 9, those tell you how many nautical miles that you have between those range rings. And so if it says 2 nautical miles to shore, then you know you're not swimming. If you have a half a mile to shore, it's a whole different deal. So it's a really good idea to learn how to read those little buttons that are on the bottom and know what those numbers stand for. All right, so selecting your chart type, obviously, you're going to go to your chart options menu, and then you're going to go chart source. And on the Simrad, you have 3 different settings. Tonight we're talking about Navionics. This is what you have your Navionics chip in, and you have to pick the right chart source or it's not going to read it correctly. It's going to stay with what the default is. CMAP in this case on mine, and there's one other one, Insight. It'll stay on those if you don't select the Navionics chip because it has to read that out of your card slot reader. And again, that's what it looks like. This is a screenshot off of mine. Everything, all these pictures that you're going to see tonight are pretty much based out of my house because everything that I demonstrate, I want you to see the differences that change in the charts and all the things that happen with the different settings that we have in one static location. All right, panning the chart. This is, on the touch screens, you can either use your rotary dial or you can, pinch your fingers up and pinch your fingers down and slide it over. What you have to remember is that once you touch that touch screen or you move it, they'll be in the very bottom right hand corner, it'll say reset cursor. You need to do that because the screen will stay at the same spot until you clear that. So once you touch that, remember that you have to restore cursor or it's not going to be keeping track of where you're actually going. All right, this is what we talked about on the chart orientation. I'm a heading up person. I like to have, if I'm going north, south, east, or west, I want my heading to be exactly which way I'm going. And you can see on here where that north cursor is and what the difference is. So again, you just have to play with it and see when you start navigating around how you can read those charts and how it equates with you, because I have to do heading up on mine. And these are just the settings, the initial, before we get into how this helps you be a better fisherman and all that. But you have to get your unit set up and you have to select the options that work for you. All right, this is the pop-up screen that we talked about. So you have Waypoint 3. You're going to edit the waypoint. You pop on that, that comes up right then and there. And another good example, Louisiana is just because it's just a lot more tricky place to fish. You can put your notes in, and then there's an alarm radius, and I'm going to show you how to set that alarm. There's a place up between Burris and Venice that's just a big old bunch of pilings and old, I don't know, it must be like some kind of a rig, oil rig or something. But I skirted over the top of those this last fall, and it was pretty terrifying. And so now I have an alarm radius that I know if I get in within a half mile of that place, it's gonna sound off an alarm, and I won't go near it. So apparently my screen is froze. Anybody chat with me? Can you still see if it's going? Did it start back up? I have good internet, so I'm not sure why. Let me see. I don't know why it would do that, but. Gotta love technology. Chat, let me see. Can you guys tell me if my screen is still frozen? Hello, Atlanta. All right, yeah, okay, we're back. All right, so being able to edit these waypoints and set these alarms is just another thing you don't think about it. If you're a bass angler or if you fish rivers, here we have hurricane debris. That's, again, we'll talk about community edits, but if you have a waypoint, you can actually mark a waypoint and set an alarm on it. So, and then name it danger 2.0 or whatever, so that you know, even if you want to fish close to it, that you can stay in a safe distance of where those underwater dangers are. And you can see those on your structure scan and your total scan transducer. But it's just super easy on these Simrad units to be able to make notes. You know, you can pop it up, and then like on mine, I made a note and said exactly what happened, and I will never go back there again, even though there are fish there, but won't do it. It was too dangerous. So, all right, there we go. Yeah, my screen is freezing up too. All right, so this is the cursor on the chart panel. This is the same like I talked about. When you touch your screen on those touch screens, it freezes it. So you either have to press the X key or restore cursor menu option. And it's just a little tiny bar at the bottom, and it just says restore cursor, and it'll just bring you back. So don't ever panic if your screen stops working. It's you've probably touched it or something's happened, and or you were looking and you're like, look, I want to fish that point, and you touch it and then it freezes, and that's because you have options then to do a go to and have auto routing to get you there. So all you have to do is just restore the cursor. It's pretty easy. This is the go to cursor again. So this is another example. I just did a little spot off the beach behind my house. So you do a go to cursor, right? And it'll give you a direct route. Or if I'd have gone farther off up in the river, it will give you an auto route to get up there. And then you just simply, it'll leave the route for you, and then you just restore cursor, and then it'll start moving. Your boat will start moving again on the screen like normal during normal operation. Measuring distance, this is not something that I use a lot, but if you know, if you're offshore and you want to go pick another wreck, or you want to go do something, the gray cursor is always going to be excuse me, where your boat is, and the blue one is what you get to move. And then if you look at the bottom of both of these screenshots, you can see where the difference in the distance is, and I just moved it just a very little bit so that you can see it. But that's just if you want to measure to go to a place, or you want to measure and see how far it is to a shoreline or to another wreck or to whatever it is that you want to measure. It's just a simple, nice little option that you have. All right, waypoints, routes, and tracks. They're all under the same dialog. but it says waypoints. Like when you push on it, it says waypoints, but then it pushes up. It brings up these screens and then you get to pick them. So that'll be on the left-hand side of your screen in the file menu. It just push on waypoints and then you'll see, and then you can select and look at everything that you have on your unit. It all goes onto the hard drive, and unless you delete it, it stays there. And the one thing that I do like about that is that you can sort those, like the routes and the tracks, like distance near and far from you. So I fish in so many different places that if I want to go, say I'm in St. Augustine, and I don't want to mess with looking through and sorting through all those different waypoints, routes and tracks and things, you can sort it so that it's the distance in nautical miles that's closest to you, and then it'll bring all those tracks and all those waypoints and all those routes that you've saved to the top of the list. I mean, it's just a big computer, and it's pretty amazing. Saving waypoints, there's either a checkpoint, a check mark on the front of your unit, or you use the rotary knob, or you can use the waypoint. You can go cursor through the menu options, and well, it's giving me a little pop-up thing here. So you have 3 different ways to mark waypoints. I usually just push the rotary knob. It's quick, and it marks it at your vessel's position. The mark key does the same thing. It's just a little check mark. It'll mark it. And then when that pops up, you have the option at this point to edit that and name it immediately, you know, rock pile at Stone Beach or whatever, so that you'll remember and you'll know. Or like for me, I fish with a lot of different people. I just have options to go out and fish with other people, or people invite me to go out. And if we're on my boat and we go to a place that they show me and it's a good fishing spot, I use their initials and then I mark it. So I know if I'm in a tournament situation or whatever, if I want to fish those spots, that I need to get permission to go back there to make sure they're not either fishing there or they don't even want me to go, which is completely fine. Charter captains are pretty protective of their spots. And so I always mark it. And then that gives me a really good way to ask permission if, during a tournament situation, that if it's okay, if I go back and fish that they're not going to be there, or, you know, that's just not a problem. So it's just a courtesy thing, but it's a really good way to do it in this edit waypoint option. And here's what it looks like on your actual screen. I marked my house as a waypoint. So it's so user friendly. And this is, again, the editing the waypoint. I know I'm kind of beating that to death a little bit, but I think a lot of people forget. They go and all of a sudden they have like waypoint 256 and they're like, well, I don't know where that is. Like, I don't remember, right? So it's super important. Then you have different icons that you can use. So if it's a fishing spot, or if it's a snorkel spot, or if it's a whatever camping place that you've marked, it's just super, super easy with that touch screen and with your keypad to just mark it and do it on the fly when you're there, because then we've all done it. You know, I had at one point like 400 waypoints and I had to go back and look at them and try and figure out why I was there and what I caught. And that's what you can put in the notes too. And we'll talk about this when you start seeing the nautical and the sonar charts, the difference. It's pretty incredible because you can mark grouper holes, you can mark snapper holes, you can mark redfish holes, because it's pretty consistent of what is going to be in those spots once you've found them. Here's the alarm radius. It's just a super easy thing. I put 1 nautical mile. That's just, if you're flying, my boat runs 64 miles an hour. If that alarm goes off, I can shut it down, coast in, get my trolling motor down, and before you know it, you're there and you're not spooking your fish or doing anything or hitting something that you would have marked in your notes. Routes, these are super easy to do. I just did a basic around like Little Laura Point, but any of you guys that use the Google Earth stuff, you know that you can go on Google Earth, and you can, on Google Earth Pro, I think it's on the regular one too, but you can mark all these routes and it'll calculate it for you. Well, on your Simrad unit, you can do the same thing. So you can sit and look and watch your sonar lines, and you can see where you want to go. And in saltwater, this is hugely important. And I'm a big lesson of this that I had on Sunday, to mark safe passage for me up into river mouths and that kind of stuff. Or just if you want to go explore, it's a great option to be able to just, yeah, I'm just it's hard to explain how to do this because when we do the auto routing, it's kind of the same thing. But so you go into the new route in your menus, and you just start plugging where you want to go, and then you can follow it. And again, back to my Louisiana example, I use that a lot because that's probably the toughest place to navigate, is that you can go and sit, and especially with the Simrad units and Navionics, and you have your iPad and your iPhone, you can sit in your hotel or whatever and set your routes and then sync them to your Simrad unit off of your electronics and name it a new route. And then it's like test 1, 2, 3, Delacroix to Hopedale or whatever. And then you can figure out if that's going to be a good way for you to go or not. This is the dock-to-dock auto routing that's just available now. This is a huge, huge, huge deal. It wasn't available in the United States until just recently. Like say it was on Google Earth and all those things, but now we have auto routing. So say like I have a tournament coming up in Panama City and I want to get to Port St. Joe or Mexico Beach. I just mark the spots that I want to go to, and based on those boat settings of my draft, my beam, and my width or length, sorry, it's going to calculate the safest route for me to get there. It's going to show me where I need to go through. Say, I guess we're leaving from Panama City Beach. So we're going to go through East Bay, West Bay, St. Andrews Bay, East Bay, Intercoastal Waterway, and then down there's a canal that you have to go through. This is going to calculate that for you, so you don't even have to guess. So if you've never been there, if you're on vacation, or if you're just out for fun with your friends or whatever, this dock-to-dock auto routing it's incredible. And there's some very good videos on Navionics.com from some of the other marine specialists that have already done that and covered it in pretty good detail. So make sure you look that up because it's a really good option. And this just shows, this is out of the Simrad manual. It shows you how on the left, the top left, it says first and last route point. And then after auto routing, see how it calculates that around that point and based on the size of the boat. And then the bottom one is collecting 2 routes, and then it combines those for you. So it's pretty incredible. So you don't ever have to worry about getting lost or, hopefully running aground or doing anything, because it's all based on all these sonar charts that we have on the Navionics maps. You can do routes using existing waypoints. Say you want to go fish 15 wrecks off of Pensacola Beach. And I just say that for an example because that's where I live. And there's a whole bunch of public wrecks, and you don't want to mess around with having to look at waypoints and do all that stuff. And so you set a route and you use all these you pick all your waypoints, and then your fishing day is set for you. You know where you're going to go. You go from 3 barges to the bridge rubble to Joe Patty's to wherever all these different wrecks are, which by the way are listed on the Navionics chips. So you can, even if you don't have waypoints, you can set routes between all these different public reefs. I think there's like 300 and something off of Pensacola Beach. It's incredible. And all the way to Destin and beyond, the counties have all that stuff listed. But now it's on the Navionics card. So you can set a route and safely know where you want to go fish. Say snapper season, we got 40 days this year. So you want to take a day and you want to maximize and not worry about trying to figure out where to go. You can mark a route, and your Simrad unit is going to follow those Navionics routes, and it's going to get you exactly to where you need to go, and saves a lot of time. You wouldn't believe how much time is wasted trying to figure out which hole to go to next. So, and then this is another big one, tracks, because like say you can do your tracks. You really can't edit the tracks that much, so you can convert them to a route and then adjust them. And then the other thing is that the tracks do not sync between the different iPads and the other units. So if you convert your track to a route, then you can sync that to your iPhone or your iPad or your Android. So there's a big learning curve to some of this stuff, but if you're kind of a nerd like me, you love to sit and do this stuff. And it's amazing how you can then, like say, as those of us that are tournament anglers or whatever, you can sit up in your hotel room and edit tracks that you went on and like, no, I don't want to do that again. I changed it to a route, and then you sync it back to your plotter the next morning, and you're not wasting time on the water. You're maximizing your time sitting in a hotel after being on the water all day long. And it's a very good deal. So this is just how you edit your routes. You go into the edit route dialog. It's all in the same when you go through all these chart options, and you need to learn them, because it's, you know, it's hard for me to sit and go through all of those, each one of these. But once you get used to your unit and you know where these things are, these are the capabilities that are unlocked for you. So you can edit your routes, you can edit your tracks, you can edit your waypoints, you can do all kinds of things that just make your day on the water a whole lot simpler. And tracks, that's just a super thing. You just go into your settings, tracks and trips. You can set different colors, you know, depending upon what species you're fishing for. You can set different colors based on your pre-fishing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so that you have a color for each day of the week. You know where you went, you know, if it's productive or not, and you know where you're not going to waste time. So, and that's just a super simple thing. I mean, it's, you just change the color on it, and it'll set automatically. So now we're going to get into the Navionics charts. All right, so like I said, today's your last day to get that sale price on the Platinum chart. So I really encourage you to do it. But now we're going to get into some of the details that once you have all those things set up on your Simrad unit, that you can now maximize all of the options that are available on your Navionics charts. Here is the photo overlay view and the standard view of my backyard. Okay, I live at the mouth of the Escambia River, and you can see the difference. You either have, and I've got my range rings, so I know how far out they are, but you can see the river channel, and then on the one, you can see South Carolina, North Carolina, like in Atlanta. Like, it gives you a perspective of where you are in relation to the rest of the world when you're on the water. So if you want, you know, it just depends upon which view you prefer. So when you're on the water, if you want to look at that 3D view and you want to see the trees and you want to see all that, or if you just want to see flat land and then just have your bearings that are listed for you. Chart overlay is one of the other things that's an option for Navionics, and Sonar Chart Live is for Navionics charts only, and I use it all the time. This is, I'm out in the middle of Escambia Bay here, and I have the transparency set so that it's recording and using the data that's on my chart already, and it's overlaying it with what's there. So if we've had a big storm, or if we've had something and there's any changes, now my map's changed and I have my own personal map. I can also upload that and share it. Some people do, some people don't. I do. But so when you do the Sonar Chart Live and the Sonar charts, it gives you a real-time measurement of where they are. So say you're fishing in a tournament and there's been something that's blown through or whatever, and your maps, maybe you didn't update your maps, maybe you bought a card and you didn't register it, which I'm gonna digress for a minute here. When you buy a Navionics card, you need to go to navionics.com, register it. You get the freshest data every single day. And there's people like me out here doing this. So all of these changes and all these things, you get that free for a year. And then you just have to get your membership on the start of the second year. So it's super important that you register those cards and get all that information, because like you can tell on this map from where I was at, because it's the mouth of a river, it changes constantly. And the folks at Navionics are like 2,000 updates a day. Like, they're constantly updating these charts. So all you have to do is plug yours into your computer and you get it, and you know when you go fishing the next day that you have the very latest data. And then I do that, plus I have my own Sonar Chart Lives that I make, my own maps, and so I can tell. So then all of a sudden you're catching, say, redfish in 4 foot of water because it's 120 degrees outside and the surface is boiling. Well, then you know that you have to stay in 4 foot of water, and with these maps, you know that you know where to go, you know where you're at, and you're not fishing too close to shore, you're not fishing too deep, because they'll stay in that same water depth. And I'm talking redfish, but you know, all the other species are like that too. They all have their specific eco environment that they want to be in. And once you figure that out and you have these maps, it makes for a much better fishing day. So specific to Navionics, community edits, we've talked about that. You're out boating, fishing, you have an iPhone app, an Android app, you have an iPad or a tablet, and you see something that's a hazard or whatever, you can do a community edit right on your phone, and that automatically goes up, that it's put into the charts. So it's a really, really great feature. Sonar Chart Live, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Part of Sonar Chart Live is the transparency and the minimum depth. And the minimum depth thing for me is a big deal, because, and I'll show you what happened to me on Sunday. All right, so there's your community edits button. You just put that on, and when you're updating your charts, all those community edits will be on there. And then you can make community edits, you can do whatever, and just be part of the solution to make sure that everybody boats safer and fishes smarter. Transparency. Okay, here we're showing again, this is, I was out just offshore from my house, and I have my transparency set at minimum, and that's what we're focusing on here right now. So it's reading, and I can still see the chart data. It's not covering it up, and then it will tie it in, like it'll stay so that you can see the original chart data, and then you can see the changes. Now, this little red mark here, I have a minimum depth. We talked about alarms for waypoints. The minimum depth is kind of your silent alarm. I have mine set at 2 feet. So if I'm running Sonar Chart Live and I'm going anywhere, whether I'm in Pensacola or Apalachicola or wherever, when that turns red, I know that I better either shut it down or keep up on plane, because I'm at my minimum depth for my boat. And this is an example just coming into my house, and it shows it takes it and it just reds it out, so that you know that you are in a not necessarily danger zone, but that you're where you have to be a little careful if you want to keep your lower unit on your boat. This is what I was talking about. I was out in the middle of Escambia Bay, and I'm going to show you 2 more slides of this. I was literally running, and I think it's like 30, 40 feet of water, whatever. I was coming off the main shipping channel, and this was the final product of what I had. And I was up on plane, and like I say, I'm probably in 8 inches at that point when I'm fully trimmed out and going. And all of a sudden, my screen just lit up like a Christmas tree, and I came back over it. Yeah, so it was like, went from 24 feet to 1 foot in about that. And because I had my Sonar Chart Live on with my minimum depth set, I knew as soon as that started turning red, I started trimming up my motor, and I started lifting that jack plate, because I was either going to get stuck or I was going to fly across it, and I wasn't going to hurt my prop. I wasn't going to hurt my outdrive. I wasn't going to take out my impeller and my water pump, because we all know that when you hit sand, that's what happens. It can get kind of nasty. But yeah, it went to 1 foot, and I went across it. So then I came back, and I charted this area. I took just a couple minutes and just went back and charted it. And it basically was like a big island that was just out in the middle of nowhere for whatever reason, storms or just current. It's kind of off, like say, off the shipping channel. But from a fishing standpoint, I'm actually even more interested in this, because if you look at the right-hand side of that, it goes from 14 to 10 feet to 16 feet to 1 foot, okay? I guarantee you, and I'm gonna get me a Carolina rig, and I'm gonna go fish that next weekend and see what's sitting in that. And on the point of that, it goes from 6 foot to 13 foot, just like a cliff. So that's an ambush point. I guarantee you there's probably flounder on that. Maybe some grouper, I don't know, but some sheep's head, definitely some black drum, because this is out in the middle of a huge bay system, and there's this just basically an underwater island, and I don't ever remember it being there, I guess. And I was quite a distance from shore. So, but my Sonar Chart Live picked that up and saved me, because, you know, I think, well, I was running 21 miles an hour. I wasn't even going that fast, and I just trimmed everything up and got that jack plate up, and I threw a little bit of mud, but I went right across the top of it, because as soon as the front of my boat, as soon as it turned red, I knew that I had to make some adjustments. So anyway, enough on that, but that's one of my favorite things about the Sonar Chart Live is having that shallow water depth of that alarm. But so now we're going to go into, there's also a menu item called shading. And if you'll see on the left-hand side, shading, look at the land, look at how flat that looks. It just looks like sand. It's very one-dimensional. and then there's a little circled in the bottom of that left-hand side, there's like a little pocket of water. Well, what that is that's a retention pond that's back behind my house. And the reason I picked that picture is because then when you put the shading on and you see how the land, everything has kind of changed, look at how you can see on the left-hand side of that retention pond, how there's like a cliff, and there's a big berm that goes up. So the point of having your shading turned on when you're not using your photo overlay is that, say you're fishing a new area and see that there's no way, because it's on the side of the highway, so there's no creeks or anything that go into it. But if you're off on a there's lots of places like this in Panama City, you'll see these little ponds and all this stuff, and if you don't have your shading on, it's just a little blue blob. But if you put your shading on, those terrain things come in, and then you know, oh, that's a legitimate pond. And if there's any kind of creek or inlet that's in there that gets you back to it, you're going to see it, and you're going to see if it's flat, or you're going to see if there's like banks, so that you know if there's banks like on this retention pond, that it's a little deeper. And especially what your tide is. If your tide is high, then you know you're probably got a pretty good chance of getting back in there and finding some fish, or at least looking around. The other part of that, we've talked about measuring your distance. This is a good point. If there was a creek coming off of that, you could take the front of your boat and you could put your cursor over and you could measure the distance to see, all right, because it's deceiving. You don't know, is it a mile? Is it 2 miles? Is it a half a mile? You could see how long that creek was and decide if you're going to go back in there and try and check out that pond. So that the shading thing is also another very, very good option on the Navionics charts. These are things that I use. You can or cannot, you'll look when you see my screenshots. The tide height, I prefer to use the actual tide menu. When I'm fishing, I always want to see where I'm at in the tide scale, especially if I have someplace that I can run, 30 or 45 minutes wherever too. I know that I can fish one spot, and if there's an inlet, like Apalachicola has 5 inlets. So you can fish 5 different tide scales during the course of a day. And if you time it right, you get at the best tides all the time. But with this, and I leave them turned on in my current speed, so I know how fast I'm going. That's the flow rate. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that, but the tide height I do, and if I start seeing differences, but it's such a habit for me to just click over on that tide menu, pull it up, and then it'll give you the nearby stations. It's like an Apalachicola, it'll list all 5, and then it'll go up to like Carabel or whatever. So you pick and you see, you can kind of take a break, take a couple of minutes and read those tides and like, okay, this is where I'm going to plan to go next, because I want to fish that tide. I want to fish that incoming tide or that falling tide, because it's a huge difference from every tide station. And I know that in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, I haven't fished there a whole lot, but they have big tide changes. I know North Carolina, it's super, super, super important on the East Coast to know what your tides are, because you will be high and dry. I've seen that water flow out like the Yellowstone River or whatever. It's pretty terrifying. But so these are the dynamic icons that they're talking about. You'll see on the left-hand one, I have them turned off. So you don't really see anything there. And this is the Laura Point one that's just by my house. You put the dynamic icon on, you can look and see that there's a tide station there. And saltwater fishermen we're just big about watching our tides. So I just leave them on. I mean, it's a really good tool. Easy view. This is either for old people or those of us that have contacts that have had them wash out during a rainstorm and you can't see anything. It doesn't tell you if it's on that or not, but it does blow it up. It blows up the print. Early in the morning, or like at sunset, or like say I've gotten into rainstorms and stuff that I'm trying to run and get back to the marina. I had this happen in Venice last year at the championship for the IFA, and I had to put the easy view on because it was raining so hard I could not read and see, and it just blows everything up, and it's nice. I don't use it often, but it's nice to have that option to be able to expand that, because you just never know, and conditions change. So here's the photo overlay that we've been talking about, and this is available on the Platinum Plus cards. you can either set it so you have no transparency or a lot of transparency. And when I do it, if I'm going to put the photo overlay on, I want to see the Google Earth view. I want to see what I'm looking at. And in this particular example, the only thing that you can really see on the very far right-hand picture is you can kind of see a canal going back up in there. And if you look at the no photo overlay, it just looks like a little nubby. But there's probably a lot of really good docks and stuff that are up on the back side of this marina, on the right-hand side of this marina. So that's where your photo overlay comes into advantage, is that it shows the actual creek. We've talked about that, like with that retention pond that doesn't have one. But with the photo overlay, you actually know that there's a creek that goes all the way back, or some kind of a canal. A lot of people here fish canals, fish docks, and catch a ton of fish. So that's why when I do the photo overlay, I like it to be, I don't even really need to see what's back behind. I just want to see the full photo. And then here's the transparency. So the minimum transparency is that you see everything. You see all the houses, you see all that kind of stuff. And again, you can kind of see that little canal that goes up there. And then maximum transparency is like you see the land that's laid out on the card, but you don't see the houses and all those kinds of things. So I always keep mine set at a minimum transparency when I'm using a photo overlay. And again, you can find so many neat little places, canals, creeks, rivers, whatever, that you would not normally see on just a standard map. So here's the full photo overlay of my house. And this is one thing that I wanted to show you, is that you can see the sandbars that are there. So again, you're not going to see that if you don't have the photo overlay. So if you're fishing ledges, and even if you're fishing those grid lines on the Sonar charts, sometimes it's nice to be able to pull up, like I toggle back and forth a lot. So, and I know for a fact, because on where the boat icon is sitting, you'll see that little point, that's called Laura Point. There's a big pier off there. You can see how that sandbar goes out and around and then comes back in. Well, the dolphin, that's like a dolphin highway. And where I'm at, we don't have a lot of grass. So it's a lot of mullet, a lot of crab, and a lot of glass minnows, that kind of stuff. And a bunch of black drum. There's black drum all over up in here, and very few redfish, not so much speckled trout. It's way too brackish. We're pretty close to the mouth of the river. But if you fish the edge of that sandbar, you'll catch fish. Like I see guys out there all the time in the crabbers. That's where they set their crab traps. And unless you have the photo overlay, it's really hard to see that. And you can sonar chart it yourself and make your own map, but it's nice to have that photo overlay that you can just position your boat on the outside of that and you'll see it. So I use that a lot when I'm in areas like this where I just want to see where those sandbars from that satellite image are. And I don't want to really necessarily have to rely on just the charts. So here's a sonar chart feature, and this is Pensacola Pass. This is set at the maximum, and I keep all of mine at the maximum. And the big black that's kind of going, the line that's going through the center of that picture is a huge, huge, huge rock ledge, and flounder, sheep's head, and it's like a highway, you know, on one end, then the other end, you'll catch all the redfish and the bull reds out in the pass. And I'm going to show you just a little bit better example of why these bathymetry maps are so important. So here's your sonar chart density. All right, so on the left, I have it set at low. And you can still see the rock ledges and things that are in there, but you don't see how hard it falls. You don't see those sonar lines, right? So if you look over on the right, I've got it set at very high, and it's zoomed out, like other than like this one was zoomed in, so you can still see that. But when you zoom out, look at that. That is 1 foot sonar lines going down. That's how steep that cliff is. It's just it basically becomes a black line. And you can see my waypoints and stuff marked in there. And it's true. Those fish follow those when the tide's coming in or the tide's going out. They just lay in there and change their nose direction of what they're going to eat for the day, because they're all fish are lazy. Like they don't swim around and you've seen them in an aquarium. So that's the one thing about with the sonar charts and setting your density so that you can see all those things. you are going to waste no time getting to the right spot. And you look to the outside of Pensacola Beach on the Santa Rosa Island. If you look at all those are that's a sandbar. The big black line out there is the sandbar. And I actually took my great niece out there on Sunday, and I've never seen so many dolphin feeding so furiously. And guess where the live bait boat was sitting? Right at the point of that, because they follow those highways. And if you have these charts and you understand what they're telling you, you can really, really maximize your fishing potential by just knowing what the terrain is and understanding that that's like that big kind of C curve. It goes all the way from the Naval Air Station all the way out into the Gulf. And at the end of that, you're going to catch king mackerel. In the middle of it, kind of in the pass, you're going to catch redfish. And then as you go back up into the intercoastal waterway, you are going to catch sheep's head and flounder and Lord knows what else. So once you figure out what species you're targeting and where they are in those ledges, it's pretty fun because you can go out and have a successful day and not spend 12 hours looking for one fish. So this is the fishing range, and this is where it comes into, once we talked about earlier, when you figure out what depth the fish are in, and this is whether you're freshwater, saltwater, or whatever. So this particular example, there's no depth highlight range on there at all. And then on the right-hand side, 6 meters to 12 meters, okay? So if you're catching fish in 6 to 8 feet of water, meters of water, then you're not gonna waste time going to those other, and there's obviously like a ledge that's in between those. So you've got two really nice kind of highways where you can go and fan cast through those, because that's where the fish are sitting, either water temperature or tides or whatever. But once you find them and you look at your depth chart and it says 6 feet, then you can set your fishing range, and that's just where you stay. So that's just another good tool that's really underutilized, because it's maximizing all these things. And then when you put all those sonar chart features in there, then you can see exactly where that 6 foot limit is within that fishing range, and you're targeting the exact place in the water table where those fish are at that particular time. And they move, but for that day, that's where they're going to be. You've seen on a lot of my screenshots these shallow water highlights. All right, so even when I'm not doing Sonar Chart Live, I have my shallow water highlight set on, and when this comes back out and it's recorded and it's on Navionics, you can go back and look. But where those are red dots, that's my shallow, and I have it at 2 foot, just like I do my alarms, everything, because that's the safety zone for me. So when I'm looking at my chart and I'm coming out of here, especially like the intercoastal waterway between Navarre and Gulf Breeze, it's like there's kind of a ledge that comes up. It's pretty deep, and then it comes up, and before you know, you're not in very much water. And so once you know, you can and there's a lot of seagrass. So you can shut down your boat before you get there, put your trolling motor on, tilt up your big motor, and you're not hurting seagrass because you don't have it down there chopping it all up or running into it. And you've got your trolling motor going, you're slow, you're not spooking the fish, and it helps you be a better steward, especially when you get into those grassy areas, because slow down, we're fishing. Like, we don't need to be burning through it. So, but that shallow water highlight is a hugely important tool on these cards. Yeah, and that's the shallow water highlight. I just zoomed in off of my house, and it's super shallow for yards and yards and yards out, but that's how my chart looks when I leave my house. When I don't have the photo overlay on, it's red, and I know, and my son is just starting to run our boat, and he's learning this, and he's got a sailboat, so he's got his set at 6 foot. So he doesn't want to run ashore either, not with a 6 foot keel underneath that Mirage. So it's a good tool no matter whether you're whether you're sailing or you're recreational boating or fishing or whatever. It's an equipment saver for sure, and a nature saver as well. So here's your Navionics chart settings. All right, seabed area, that's not seagrass, it's the depth. So I have, in this example, I have it set at 6 foot, because that changes the color of blue. And then you can see where the shallow water comes in with the red dots in it. So safe passage, that's actually the shipping channel that goes up to the Monsanto plant or whatever, but you can see how you have to stay in the middle of the bay with that I know that that light blue is someplace that I'm always safe no matter what. And that's called the seabed setting. And depending on how big your boat is, you can have it at whatever depth, but I just keep it at 6. Presentation type. There are 2 presentation types on the Navionics chips, obviously, because we're based out of Italy. And so you have the US or you have the international. And there's been a couple of times mine has gotten reset to the international, and I'm looking at it like it's Greek. But make sure that you set, if you're fishing in the States, set it to the United States settings, because that's all set up for how our systems work, our measurement systems and everything. All right, annotation. This is another one that people don't think a lot about, but it's important. On the left side, I have the annotation shut off, and you can see where the 2 circles are. There's no writing. It doesn't say anything. Well, on the right-hand side, it says ruins and then Sullivan's Ditch, all right? Because that's a legitimate fishing area. That's what that area is called, is Sullivan's Ditch. The ruins on the other side are a bunch of pilings. They're marked. So if you don't have your annotation set on, and especially with ruins, when it comes to ruins, and that's like with the community edits and all that stuff, it's really important that you know, and there's a big spoilage area that comes out of the mouth of the river. You can see where that's shallow, and I have a waypoint marked there. That's actually a hazard, because I have the edge of that sandbar marked so that I don't cut through there, because it's super, super shallow depending upon how the tide is, and there's boats that get hung up there all the time. So those ruins and spoils and things are very important to have marked, because Port St. Joe, if you go out of the marina there, it says spoils, and it's all sand. They have the shipping channel, and then it's just, they keep it dredged. So all those spoils from that dredged shipping area are all piled out there, and that's marked if you have your annotation on. So another good point to make sure you just understand what some of these things are. Chart details. This is, if you look at the left-hand side, I have it on standard. So you have just flat, again, land. And if you look at the right-hand side, the highway systems are in there. Why does this matter if you're a fisherman? Well, if Uncle Joe tells you that at the corner of Olive and Scenic, if you go off about 50 feet offshore, there's a point out there, because there's a lot of people that fish that way. Or like there's some chimneys that are on the bluffs here, and you can tell where the highway is. Well, if you have your chart details turned on and you know you're familiar with the area, wherever it is, highway or a stoplight or whatever, you know that you can, if they've told you that there's a spot. I was actually out with Tim Scallon, from one of my sponsors from Emerald Coast Fabricators, and he was doing the same thing. He was lining up 2 buildings and saying, this is where you need to go. Like, wasn't even looking at the map. So I turned on my chart details, and I could see, and then I put the photo overlay on where he was talking about from this building to this building, and we got right on the spot. So just another one of those little things that, or, you just, for navigation, or if you get lost, or if you're in trouble, you know that there's a place that you can get to quick. You can go find that highway, or, run up on shore, and you're not going through somebody's, 20 foot of forest or whatever. So, and safety depth, we've talked about that. Same thing. It's the seabed area, the safety depth. It's all the same thing. And so, just play around with your units and see, just look and pay close attention to what it changes. And we've talked about so many different options that if you change one thing or another, and then it just changes the whole view of it, but you'll tweak it eventually till you'll be to the point like I am. I know exactly how I want it set up. I've got it set up perfectly, and probably no one else could ever get on my boat and figure it out, because they have theirs set up way different than I do. But okay, here's your contours depth. This comes back to on your sonars. I've got one set at 18, because that's your safety depth. That's like, if you don't care what's below that. But this is back to that same place in Pensacola Pass. Look at those rocks that are on that left-hand side. It doesn't show you how steep that is or whatever, because you're limiting yourself to 18. But if that's where you want to fish, that's where you want to fish. That's understood. But then if you look over and you put all of them in, and say, so you've limited yourself to the 18, and then all of a sudden you put all on and you're not catching any fish, and you move back over to that big black ledge, And all of a sudden, yeah, look at all the waypoints marked there. Flounder, 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 flounder. If I was fishing up in that 18-foot depth, I wouldn't have caught anything. So it's really important that you know and understand what those are, and not only to how to set them, but to understand what they mean. Because if you look over on the left-hand side, you look where my waypoints are, they're not even within the safety depth. They're not even close. And if you're concentrating on that area, you're not going to get to where the fish are. So once you set that on, and then you understand why they're there. And why they're there is because there's a big old shelf, and they got a little condo set up in there, and that bait's running back and forth, and they're not having to work very hard for their food. So tying it all together, that kind of wraps it up. I know it's a lot of information, but just play and read your owner's manuals, and definitely invest in a Navionics chip, because I think it's really important. That the Regions cards are awesome. The Platinum Plus obviously are the best products that we have. And today is the last day to save that $30 on those Platinum charts, Navionics.com with your Platinum 2018 code. And so if you have any questions, you can private message me at capt.hallie@gmail.com. If you go to buy a unit or go to buy a chip and you're not quite sure what you want, or you buy it and you're not quite sure how to set it up, I'll be happy to help you walk through it. So if that's all, I haven't seen any chats or questions, so I will open it up if somebody wants to ask a question. Otherwise, we will say good day. Oh, there's a question. Good job. Yeah. All right. You guys have a wonderful evening, and thank you for attending my webinar.